So as you all know, I think, Chris is going to give the talk today. We don't need inductions among ourselves, but Chris?
All right. So good morning. Hold on a second. All right.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay. So there's a teacher at Tassajara named Greg Fain, who I really like, and who I have worked with a lot over the years, particularly when I was in the Navy. Before my first talk last year, I asked if I could borrow his intro that he always did before each talk, and he said I could. And I don't want to keep doing it, but I wanted to do it just one more time because since Peter and Jane made me Tonto recently, I can do his intro closer to how he always did it. So thank you for indulging me. Submitted under imitation is the highest form of flattery. Here goes. Good morning. My name is Chris Burnham, and I am the Tonto, or Head of Practice at Beginner's Mind Zen Center. I want to start this talk by thanking and acknowledging my teachers, Peter and Jane Schneider and Greg Fain, and just to say that this talk is just to encourage you in your practice. So, my talk today is on the topic of corrosive doubt, which is sort of one of the 5 hindrances. I say sort of because the 5 hindrances, as normally taught, are desire for sensual pleasure, ill will, sloth or drowsiness, restlessness, torpor, which I think could be called agitation more generally, but I don't want to mess with the classical teachings too much. And then doubt. In preparing for this talk, I looked up a lot of articles about doubt. In Sanskrit is vichikitsa. Probably pronouncing that wrong. Anyways, as I was looking this stuff up, I was getting a little frustrated because it didn't seem to be what I thought it was. It seemed to be more like just indecision. In the Wikipedia article, they cite an explanation which goes, "It is to be in 2 minds about the truth, and its function is to serve as a basis for not becoming involved with positive things." Gil Fronsdal wrote, "Doubt as a hindrance is a mental preoccupation involving indecision, uncertainty, and lack of confidence. It causes a person to hesitate, vacillate, and not settle into meditation practice. Its simplest manifestation can be a lack of clarity about the meditation instruction, which may be settled quickly with further instruction. More dramatically, doubt can involve deep, fiery inner conflicts and fears stirred up by the practice. All along the spectrum, doubt can keep the mind agitated, perhaps simmering in discursive thought and feelings of inadequacy. Alternatively, it can deflate the mind, robbing it of interest and energy." So this gets about 75% right in describing what I went through that led me to want to talk about this. It's pretty close, but not I feel like my experience was a little bit more, again, close though. So I had heard it expressed at some point as corrosive doubt, but I didn't find any articles that used that word when I was preparing. This is frustrating because in my experience, corrosive doubt got way more towards the heart of what was throwing me off in my practice at the time. It wasn't just being wishy-washy, it was certainty, actually, that Buddhism, Zen practice, was not worth doing. It was total alienation. It was a total lack of confidence, not in meditation instruction, but in Buddhism being worthwhile. And it ate away pretty aggressively at my motivation to keep going just as rot eats away at healthy living tissue. So at the time, and this was about a year ago, I wrote it out to myself like this: I want to feel good. I want to feel okay with how the world is, with how I am. But I want to accomplish this by changing the world into something I can feel okay with. I want to change myself into someone I would feel good being. I don't want to just be okay with everything through sheer force of will or habit. I want the world to be good enough. I want to be worthy enough. Giving up that desire, giving up the labels and ideas and stories that fuel that desire, that isn't good enough. Because at the end of the day, I am still this person in the world, and the world is still horrible, and I can't make it better, and that is killing me, and Buddhism can't help. So, I wasn't of two minds. I was of one mind, and that mind was flooded with convictions about the world and beliefs about what Buddhism should be. But the result was ultimately the same. I was preoccupied and decidedly unconfident in the practice. This preoccupation served as the basis for not cultivating positive energies. Articles I read were also frustrating because they talked about overcoming this hindrance. As far as I can remember, I didn't do anything to overcome my corrosive doubt. It was just by the grace of mind that I got a clear view of what Buddhism was and how out of step my ideas that led to this negative mental state were from reality. The thing is, the world isn't good enough. Air quotes. There is so much pain, so much unnecessary pain, because so many people in their delusion hurt themselves and hurt each other and really fuck up life on this planet, all because of their ignorant ideas about what their life is for. And I don't want to accept myself from that. I'm not, well, that's part of the problem I was experiencing, was that I was just looking elsewhere at everyone else and trying to ascribe fault. And that's a problem. But anyways, so I often think of a quote that I believe is attributed to Confucius, but I might be wrong about that. And I'm also sort of paraphrasing what I remember the quote to be. But the quote goes, "When I see virtue in others, I endeavor to cultivate it in myself. When I see fault, I look inward." This also reminds me of Brad Warner often writes about karma being like a gun or like a toy gun, which when he was a child, his dad always admonished him to never point at anyone else. This is true about karma. It's true about Buddhism in general. Buddhism is personal. And what's more, Buddhism isn't actually supposed to fix the world, but it's also not like spiritual bypass. It's not a way for me to force myself to be okay with bad things. This gets, and I'd need to explore this more, and I might do a whole other talk on this, and just in general, like people's hangups, my hangups. But this notion gets to the heart of one of my biggest hangups, which is that this difference between acceptance in the sense of having no quarrel with reality, or not like closing myself off from reality. The way to fight that being the acceptance that Buddhism is about. So it's the difference between that and more like acquiescence or endorsement or approval. So the acceptance that Buddhism is talking about isn't saying the stuff that's messed up about the world is okay, and that's how we stay calm and equanimous. No, it's not that. It's something even more radical. It's not endorsement of the bad things in the world. It's a prescription for how to respond. It is letting go of my ideas, not only about what Buddhism is, but also about myself. It's letting the ideas that I have about life get completely shattered. It is releasing my attachment to suffering itself, and that is extremely hard. At some point, it occurred to me that no one ever told me Buddhism would be easy. And this is kind of why I resent the first line of the Shin Shin Ming. The great way is not difficult, just avoid picking and choosing. Oh, all right. Simple. Simple, not easy. I also really like, there's some dialogue in a koan where a student asks his teacher, what's the highest teaching of Buddhism? And the teacher says, do good, avoid bad things. And the student says, well, that's so simple. Even a child could say that. And the teacher says, a child could say it, but people very advanced in years can't even do it. So I appreciate that a little bit more because I think it really speaks to my experience. So we have to accept what Buddhism is and what it isn't if we are to do this very difficult practice and attain whatever liberation we can in this crazy mixed up world. There's a Jiddu Krishnamurti quote that I think of a lot also, and that is, it is not a sign of mental health to be well adjusted to a sick world. So I don't have to be well adjusted to it, but I have to accept it in the radical way that Buddhism teaches me to if I want to do Buddhism right. Buddhism is medicine with which we treat the afflictions that result from sentient existence in samsara. No more, no less. And it will work as it says it will. It will not, it will not work as I had felt it should. I really like the phrase that I think I coined, by the grace of mind. Obviously, the original phrase that I'm adapting is by the grace of God, but in Buddhism, we don't have God. We have big mind or Buddha nature, etc. So it's by the grace of Buddha nature, not by some practice that I had learned from a Dharma talk to overcome this hindrance, but just grace. And this experience, wait, hold on real quick. Just in general, it was very lucky that I even came into contact with Buddhism in the first place and was receptive to it. A couple weeks ago, Vicky Austin gave a talk, and she referenced the classic analogy of a turtle swimming up blindly from the depths of the ocean and accidentally sticking its head through a hole in some driftwood on the surface. Being born a human who stumbles into Buddhism is even luckier than that. So this experience that I went through showed me that good luck or grace didn't stop once I was delivered to Peter and Jane's doorstep. Persistence in practice is an ongoing group effort between me and innumerable unknown causes and conditions. This was a koan, and when I was having some difficulty in my first summer at Tassajara, Mako, who was the director at the time, told me about the koan where you've got this iron ball, like a red hot iron ball lodged in your throat, and you can't cough it out and you can't swallow it. So when I can't spit out my objections to the world, but I can't swallow them either, what do I do? That's the koan, is asking the question and practicing with the question, not in trying to devise an answer or some sort of clever solution. Just like hanging from a tree branch by your teeth and someone comes down below and says, what is the meaning of Bodhidharma coming from the West? If you answer, you fall to your death. If you do nothing, then you fail. So we're in a predicament, human existence. Now there's some extra stuff that I did more organization for this talk than I did for my last talk, but there was still a bunch of stuff that I didn't quite fit in order. So I want to kind of just share some of that. There's a talk by Joseph Goldstein that I listened to, and what he said that I really liked was the allure of doubt is that it comes disguised as wisdom. And I definitely experienced at the time and just periodically this feeling that cynicism is somehow superior to like optimism or hope. And there's a whole thing about hopes in general, but I don't want to go into that. But just in general, like to feel cynical about life just feels more like that's what's really going on. Like I've got some knowledge about life that it supersedes any kind of fluffy like everything is perfect just the way it is. Although to that end, like I heard at some point, you don't have to like someone to love them. So I think this is kind of similar. Being perfect isn't being good enough. Something different. I don't know what it is, but I don't have to endorse what's messed up about the world to struggle to see it as perfect. And even if I never see it as perfect, struggle is what practice is all about. Again, not changing the world, just coping. And that's another example of Buddhism being the middle way between two different extremes, not falling into one or the other, not falling into cynicism and not falling into just kind of like a blasé, aloof, Pollyanna-esque type viewpoint. There's a quote that actually, when I was going through Facebook today, one of my Facebook memories from today was sharing a friend's post of this quote by Francis Weller, who I don't know who that is. I don't know if they're Buddhist or not, but this quote really spoke to me when I was preparing for the talk. And that is, the work of the mature person is to carry grief in one hand and gratitude in the other, and to be stretched large by them. How much sorrow can I hold? That's how much gratitude I can give. If I carry only grief, I'll bend towards cynicism and despair. If I have only gratitude, I'll become saccharine and won't develop much compassion for other people's suffering. Grief keeps the heart fluid and soft, which helps make compassion possible. That really resonated for me. Also, so in a Dharma talk that Linda Gallion gave, she told a story where a man comes to Buddha and says, Buddha, I've got these problems with my life. My wife and kids, they stress me out. My business isn't doing so well. And I'm kind of paraphrasing, I'm kind of embellishing, making it my own. But, like the rains, they flooded out my garden and all blah, blah, blah. And Buddha's like, I can't help you with those reasons of suffering. And the man says, oh, and Buddha says, and I don't remember it doesn't matter the exact number, but let's say 81. So Buddha says, there are 81 different kinds of suffering, and Buddhism can only help with one of those. The man's like, what's that one? And Buddha says, dealing with the other 80. And there's another story, a Tassajara story or a San Francisco Zen Center story that I really, really, really like and really kind of gets to the heart of my quandary, my crisis of faith. And just in general, again, a recurring problem for me. And from what I hear, a lot of other people in general. And that story is that she was talking with her teacher, Reb, and she held out her Raksu. She asked him, is this enough to save the world? And Reb responded, it's enough to save the world from you. And there's a tendency, I think, to maybe blow that kind of stuff off when I'm in a negative state of mind as being like trite. But it's funny because it's not actually. It's funny because it's relatable, and it's actually very poignant. But if not appreciated, it can be easy to kind of dismiss as like just a salve for a tumor, but it's actually not. So doubt can actually be very useful. When it hinders me the way it was, it's a hindrance. But it's kind of funny because I had this doubt about Buddhism being good enough, but I did not doubt the underlying delusions and assumptions that I was making that led me to that in the first place. So if I had doubted that stuff, doubt would have been very helpful. So yeah, Buddhism. So again, in a Linda Gallian again, in practice discussion once told me, Buddhism is a story, but it's a helpful story. And the world won't be good enough as long as I'm believing certain stories that I'm telling myself. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff in my life that I do not question because it can't save the world, like watching Star Trek or going to therapy. I never go like, oh, eating can't save the world, so is it worth doing? But for some reason, I got stuck on doing that with Buddhism. I don't know why. I don't know why. Let's see. Yeah, so again, getting back to the beginning of this talk and the general theme, there was a talk I listened to by Steven Subota Nunez, and he said, it can be quite disappointing to see how the world is, to see how people are, to see the kind of things that we feel we can't change. And the Buddha's lesson to us when we are confronted with that reality is that at the very least, we can start turning our attention inward and see what we can change about ourselves, to see what we can do to alleviate the suffering that we feel. And in the process of healing our heavy hearts and making them lighter, we often find ways to lessen the burden of others as well. Oftentimes not to the extent we would wish, but enough in a way that hopefully helps. So yeah, all ever Buddhism professes to be is a theory on how not to suffer, a theory that we have to put into practice that can give us some kind of liberation, but that liberation does not come by changing the world to be something that we find good enough or changing ourselves to be good enough. And it's also not spiritual bypass. It's something else entirely. So what is it? And we practice and we see. So that's basically the talk. I think my next one, I might be a little bit better prepared. Might be a little bit better organized. But I don't think I've talked too long, so maybe we can do a little Q&A, or just people can weigh in and share what they want to share. So like put your hands up. All right, Sandy. Sandy, you're muted.
No.
So you're not muted anymore, according to Zoom.
Peter, we're already over the limit. Remember, we have a board meeting
Okay,
today,
yeah.
right?
It's okay, we're going to do this.
Okay. Let's, Sandy, I'm gonna move on to Michael.
There was a part of your talk where, well, actually your talk, my question is slightly a branch off of what you were talking about, in the sense that the doubt of your ability to use your practice properly to deal with the things in the world. And in my case, I do go through periods of doubt where I understand Zen enough to help me understand the world. And then I realized, okay, wait a minute, it's not the point. The point is, physician, heal thyself first. Try to get my act together. But what is the doubt in your ability to use the practice accordingly in line with what you were talking about? Whereas instead of, I can't help the world. Well, I'm not sure I am able to use this to help myself. And I struggle with that. And I bounce around with being, okay, I can use, my practice is going to work for me, and other times it doesn't. Is that in relation to your talk? And if it is, what is your thought on that?
So yes, um, I think the problem I was having came from the notion that I had forgotten the um, that Buddhism is to help cope with the world. I think you sort of said that. That I had sort of forgotten what Buddhism actually is supposed to help with, or how it's supposed to help. So when I saw that, and I realized, that if I'm doing it as purported, that I can I can cope. Is that sorry? Is that
Yeah, because it's the idea that, I'm not trying to save the world, but I have doubts that I have the tools to be of any benefit to the world.
Yeah, exactly. So that's basically it. That was my problem, is um, getting it in my head that I needed to save the world in order to be doing anything worth doing. Um, and it's weird because I even at the time that I was in this weird mindset, there's this kind of like nagging voice, like no one can save the world, or as Mother Teresa says, do small things and do them with great love. Um, Yeah, I don't know. And actually, so for a while, I sort of examined, like, what exactly was the cause of this crisis, and I think to some extent, I was like, my ego was it was like a reflex to stepping up here with the sangha, and just kind of feeling like the self that I had made over the years was gonna go away once I ordain and all that stuff. And that's one theory I have, but that's definitely like the second arrow parable type stuff. So I don't know how helpful it is to look at it like that. But anyways, so I hope that more or less got to the issue. Sandy, did you resolve it? Okay, so again, Zoom says you're not muted, but I still can't hear you. So I'm gonna go to John.
Hello, thank you very much for the talk. It was great. I think that the doubts that you had are extremely common in Buddhism, in Zen Buddhism, Western Zen Buddhism especially, because people who come to this are generally kind of compassionate people to begin with, and then the practice helps you to grow compassion. And then you see the news and you look around the world and you see the things happening. And then you may find it hard to sit on your cushion and watch those things go by and feel that you're doing nothing to help. But for me, what I like to remember and think about is that this is the practice of the bodhisattva. It's the bodhisattva practice. And the first part of that practice is a journey up the mountain to try and get to the point where we can be and are and can act as a bodhisattva. And to remember that getting there requires some tools, gathering them along the way, like Michael said. And that process is really important. And for that process, it's really important that you sit on the cushion. And we need to remember, that, rule when you get on an airplane. You always, when the when the air masks drop, you always put it over yourself and help yourself first so that you can help those around you. And I think that that's an important thing to remember, is that in order to really help those around us, that we really need to help ourselves first and make sure that we're healthy. And so I don't know, for me, at least, that logically helps me get through some of the things, and then when we reach the top of the mountain, then it's easier to go back down and gather the others up. That's the other part of the Bodhisattva journey, right? Once we reach the top, we're not done. We leave the top, okay? And we leave that perfectness or whatever it is, and we go back and we leave it to gather others to bring them along for the ride. And I think that's an important part to remember about our journey. I would be interested in hearing your thoughts on that, Chris, and anyone else.
Definitely. And I'm gonna respond to you, John, and then talk to Mitch and Spencer, and then Peter and Jane wrap up, and then it'll be time for service. Hopefully that works out. Sorry, Sandy. Shoot me an email. Yeah, this is an ongoing thing. So one of the first thoughts I had, John, was not for nothing, but at this time I was doing a lot less Zazen. So I think there might be a correlation there. Also, I really liked what you said in terms of a lot of compassionate people come to Buddhism and then cultivate that compassion through practice. In doing Zazen and in cultivating this practice, we soften up the defenses we have around our heart. And when we open our heart, we're letting everything in, not just the love of other people, but also the hate and the anger and the other negative mental states, all the shit out there in the world that can come in too. And it's another reason why the practice is challenging. And it's not that we mitigate the negativity in the world. It's just that as we lower our defenses, we're also increasing our capacity to deal with the gross stuff that comes in. And that's another thing I need to keep in mind when I'm looking at this practice and trying to appreciate it for what it is. Is I'm feeling this way because of the practice. I've made myself more sensitive to it, to the pain. Or as Avalokiteshvara's, one of her pseudonyms is the regarder of the cries of the world, or the hearer of the cries of the world. And that's one of many figures that I'm emulating in doing this practice. And it hurts, but it's a necessary hurt. It's a hurt that it takes a degree of maturity to appreciate. So that's another thing I'm doing, is trying to mature myself in the practice to accommodate the suffering, myself and others, because the more I mature in the practice and can do that, the more I can help. Mitch?
Thank you, Chris. I'm gonna, Mark's barking at the clock, so I'm gonna try to keep this short. We take a bodhisattva, and it's off of something John said, that take a bodhisattva vow. Beings are numberless, I vow to save them. So I think that we can affect the world. And I think of the world understood impermanence a little better. And that if understood self and no self, and ignorance that leads to greed, hate, and delusion. I mean, if you look at somebody like Vladimir Putin has a thought in his head that he wants to recreate an imperial Russia. It's a thought, it's impermanent, and thousands and hundreds of thousands of people are dying behind it. I think that if they understood the Buddhist paradigm and the psychology that the Buddha left us, that a lot less of this would happen. Okay, so I think that that you say that we can't reach out and save the world. I'm not so sure. And I think that the socially engaged Buddhists think that that's possible. And I think that we can. And again, but every time we sit, and this is something Jane taught me, every time we sit, every time we have a good thought, every time we do a good deed, we move our world closer to that. So I think that that's the Mahayana in itself. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. Yeah, that's Spencer.
Well,
Yeah, yeah.
one quote I think you left out was, to practice, you have to have great faith, great doubt, and great determination. And, I see great faith as faith in the practice, faith that we're all awakened, and I doubt that a lot of times, and I doubt my ability to be awake or that society is awake. But I have faith and I'm determined. And, I often think I'm feckless in my ability to solve any of the problems in the world, but I've been told that when I sit, at least I can solve my problems, and I don't do harm to myself and to others, and to John's point, the biblical quote of heal thyself, that's why I sit, and I don't know how you see that triad working in your practice.
I need to remember it.
Great faith, great doubt, great determination.
Peter and Jane, do you want to say a capping phrase?
Yes.
I do.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say, Chris, that was a very nice talk. And I like all the difficult questions you laid on everyone's footstep. What they're doing. Most of them were the kind of questions you have to grow into. You can't just sit down and work them out. And they're like lifelong, change your whole body and mind kind of questions to feel at peace with. So some of them were really, really good questions. I just like to mention one thing in particular, is that we do get so attached to the suffering we see, we forget to see the old threads running through everything as well. We're like somebody looking at a very nice tapestry, but it's old and tattered and messed up and quite dilapidated. And we don't even see the unnoticeable little gold threads running through it that enhance the rest of the whole picture. So I would say that in my time with this last thing with the stroke, I found in nursing homes that there are so many good people around in the midst of the worst of your feelings and how terrible everything is. And they're always there without calling attention to what they do or what they're saying or anything. They just do it and they see what's needed and they just act on it. And I was very impressed, thinking once again that there may be a lot of suffering in the world, but there's also a lot of really good people in the world. They just don't call attention to themselves ever.
I also like the quote. Well, actually, no, I'm not going to say that one. Peter?
Yes. Sometime in our, that was very courageous of you, by the way. You exposed yourself to us. And that came out wrong, but anyway. But yeah, I think you get the meaning. But anyway, the time will come, Chris, guaranteed, that a little voice in you will come up and say, it's okay, Chris. And then everything will change.
You'll say, Hark, is it?
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.